Today's lesson is, Can seaweed farming save the world? Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And again, we're talking about seaweed farming and whether it can save the world. Now, of course, seaweed is already consumed by millions of people every day, but I guess our article is suggesting that we grow more seaweed and more people in the world should eat seaweed in order to help protect the earth or to save the earth by reducing greenhouse gases and things like that.
Right. And while for a lot of people, eating seaweed can be a cultural thing, I think it might be hard to introduce this seaweed to certain types of culture. But nevertheless, we know that this is something that scientists are looking at that might change the whole global warming issue that we are facing today.
Exactly. And an advantage to seaweed is that it doesn't really require much to grow. It just needs some sunlight and it needs some seawater. And therefore, it has great potential as a food crop. So some people are suggesting that we have more seaweed farms. Even though people in Asia already eat large amounts of seaweed, I guess they want to spread this idea to other parts of the world as well. And also, it's a good source of protein. So if you're a vegetarian or if you don't have access to meat, if you can't obtain meat, then seaweed might be a good choice for you. Well, let's find out more about seaweed in today's lesson. Let's listen to the first part and we'll come right back.
In addition to its dietary uses, seaweed has also found applications in other areas. When scientists filled 10% of a car's gas tank with seaweed fuel and the rest with regular gasoline, they discovered that the carbon emissions were the same as those from gasoline alone. However, seaweed has the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as it grows, a benefit that could make it a desirable biofuel for the future.
大家好，第一部分首先来介绍形容词 dietary， 意思是饮食的，有关饮食的。例如 The doctor told me to improve my dietary habits. 医生告诉我要改善饮食习惯。又或者说 Please let us know in advance if you have any special dietary needs. 如果您有任何特殊饮食方面的需求，请事先让我们知道。接下来我们看到名词 application， 它的意思是应用、用途，也可以是应用程式或是申请的意思。例如 Doctors are excited about the successful applications of the new medicine. 医生对新药的成功应用感到兴奋。又或者说After Judy mailed in her university application, she had to wait a few months to learn if she had been accepted. 在寄出她的大学申请书后 Judy 必须等几个月才能得知是否被录取。再来看到 emission， 这个名词有气体、热量或是光线的排放物的意思。例如 Every vehicle in the company is tested annually for harmful emissions. 该公司的每辆车每年都会进行有害排放物测试。或是The environmental group called for higher taxes on carbon emissions to reduce pollution. 环保团体呼吁提高碳排放税以减少污染。下一个是名词 capacity， 意思是能力、才能或是容量。例如 Winnie doesn't have the capacity to lift such a heavy box. Winnie 没有办法举起这么重的箱子。或是 The large airplane has the capacity to carry over 500 passengers. 这架大型飞机拥有承载超过500名旅客的容量。
Okay, so again, we're talking about seaweed, and in the first sentence here, we do have a common pattern in addition to something, which means we have the first thing, so in addition to that, or also we could add to something else. In this particular case, in addition to its dietary uses, it also has some applications in other areas. So in addition to its dietary uses, not only does it have uses in our diet, but also it can be used in other areas. Now, if we use the word dietary, we're talking about things that have to do with food and drink and with nutrition and things like that. So I could say, for example, this food is high in dietary fiber. fiber. In other words, it's got a lot of fiber that can be a good part of your diet.
And in modern days, dietary is kind of an important discussion topic for a lot of people because we have people that are vegetarians or vegans. And sometimes in Taiwan, people confuse vegetarian and vegan because vegetarians can eat eggs and milk, whereas vegans, they don't eat any animal products at all. So nowadays, there are lots of dietary requirements, especially when certain people, for example, have diabetes or a certain illness. They have to have strict dietary needs. Now, in this case, we're still talking about seaweed, and besides using seaweed as a dietary form, besides eating it, there are other applications in other areas. So there are other ways to use seaweed.
Exactly. So it can have applications in other areas. Here we've got the word application. That could be a formal request to go to a school or to get some money from the government. You fill out an application form. You apply for that thing. But in this particular case, application just means uses, okay? There are other applications for seaweed. It can be used in other areas. An application could also be a computer program on your phone, or app for short. That just means application. But in this particular case, we're talking about uses. This seaweed can be used in other areas. So when scientists filled 10% of a car's gas tank with seaweed fuel and the rest with regular gasoline, they discovered that the carbon emissions were the same as those from gasoline alone. So if you add seaweed to gasoline as a biofuel, then that could also help with greenhouse gases or carbon emissions. And an emission is just something that comes out from something. If you ride a scooter or if you drive a car in Taiwan, every once in a while you need to have your emissions checked.
So when they used the seaweed fuel and added to regular gasoline, they found out that the carbon emissions were the same as before. So if you used a full tank of just gasoline, and if you used a tank of seaweed fuel mixed with gasoline, the emissions are the same. However, seaweed has the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as it grows, a benefit that could make it desirable biofuel for the future. So in this sentence, we see that seaweed, however, it has the capacity or the ability to absorb carbon dioxide. And basically, a capacity is the amount that something can contain or produce something, or the ability. So seaweed has the ability to absorb. They have the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as it grows. So we know that we're trying to encourage more farming of seaweed in the ocean. And as more seaweed grows, it is able to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Right, so it does have the ability or the capacity to suck carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, to remove it from the atmosphere and put it someplace else. And yes, indeed, we've got CO2 or carbon dioxide. Just CO is carbon monoxide, but here we've got carbon dioxide, which is considered a greenhouse gas, and we want to remove it from the atmosphere. So seaweed has this potential. That is another application of seaweed in another area. And yes, indeed, we are describing the seaweed that is put into a gas tank as a biofuel, which is a fuel made from living things. Fuel, of course, is some kind of substance that gives us energy, like gasoline is a kind of fuel for your car. And, of course, seaweed is considered a type of biofuel, as are other kinds of substances as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson. Here comes the second part.
Scientists have also found that adding seaweed to the diets of cows causes them to produce less methane gas, one of the primary contributors to global warming. Given the massive scale of the global beef industry, using seaweed to feed cows could definitely help protect the environment.
第二部分，我们看到名词 contributor， 它的意思是促成因素或是贡献者、 也可以是捐款人的意思。例如 Air pollution is seen as a likely contributor to health problems affecting urban children. 空气污染被视为影响都市孩童健康问题的可能因素。又或者说 This contributor donated a huge amount of money to some rural schools. 该位捐款者捐出了巨额款项给一些偏乡学校。接着介绍 massive， 这个形容词是巨大的或是庞大的意思。我们可以说The earthquake caused the massive tsunami and destroyed the village nearby. 该地震引发了巨大的海啸，并摧毁了附近的村庄。又或者说 The company underwent massive staff cuts last year. 该公司去年进行了大规模裁员。
Okay, let's talk about the second part. Scientists have also found that adding seaweed to the diets of cows causes them to produce less methane gas. We know that cows, they produce a lot of methane gas. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people tried to change their diet to become vegetarians because they wanted to try to consume less beef or less cow meat, okay? Because they knew that cows produced a lot of methane gas. And this gas came from the manure that they produce. So when cows poop, it creates methane gas. And methane gas basically is a colorless, odorless, natural gas, but it is also very flammable. So it's kind of dangerous too. And methane gas is also one of the causes of greenhouse gases.
Right, so methane itself is a greenhouse gas. If it gets up into the atmosphere, it helps block light and heat from the sun. It traps it in the atmosphere, and hence we have global warming. And yes, indeed, methane is produced by cows, especially when they fart. So you got to watch out for cows farting because there'll be a lot of methane there going up into the atmosphere. And yes, indeed, if you add seaweed to the diets of cows, well, perhaps they will produce less methane. I should mention that the word methane can also be pronounced methane. I think I've heard people from the UK say methane, but Americans say methane. It depends on where you are. And yes, indeed, we do identify methane as being a primary contributor to global warming. So a contributor is someone or something that adds something to something. The verb form is to contribute. You might contribute to a school project, for example, by offering your time or your expertise or something like that. You contribute to the project, you add to it, and the person who adds something to something is a contributor.
So because in modern day, more people are eating meat and especially cows. So a lot of farmers, they have a lot of cattle and their cattle are producing a lot of methane gas. So they are one of the main contributors to global warming. Given the massive scale of the global beef industry, using seaweed to feed cows could definitely help protect the environment. So because more and more people are consuming beef, they're eating a lot of beef, they need to produce more meat to sell to the consumers. They need to try to find another type of way to feed the cows so that cows stop producing so much methane gas. Now, here we have the word massive, and basically massive is something that's really, really big, and sometimes when something is massive, you can also use it to describe its weight or its size. So, for example, that boulder is massive. It's so heavy that it needs special type of machinery to break it down. So, in this case, the global beef industry is so massive that they need to find another way to reduce the methane gas produced by the cows.
Right. Now, also in this sentence, we have the word given. That means you need to take this into consideration. So we could say, when you consider the massive scale of the global beef industry, therefore we can conclude that using seaweed to feed cows would help protect the environment. As an example here, I could say, given that Krishna is a Hindu, I better not prepare any beef for dinner tonight. meat. Okay, Hindus don't eat beef, or at least some of them don't. So you need to take that into consideration. So if you take this into consideration, if you think about it, if you think about the massive scale of the global beef industry, then it seems like feeding cows seaweed might be a good idea. But of course, we need to determine whether cows actually like eating seaweed in the first place. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third and final part.
In short, seaweed appears to offer numerous benefits through various applications. However, experts are concerned about the effects that seaweed farming on a larger scale might have. While our oceans are vast, large seaweed farms could change ecosystems forever and might even destroy some forms of marine life. To prevent seaweed farming from doing more harm than good, regulations should be created to ensure that we do not abuse this treasure from the seas.
第三部分介绍片语 do more harm than good， 它用来表示弊大于利。例如 Taking these pills for your cold may do more harm than good to your body。 吃这些感冒药对你的身体可能是弊大于利。最后一个例子 If you help Jim finish his homework by giving him the answers, you are doing him more harm than good。 如果你告诉 Jim 答案来帮助他完成作业，你所做的是害他，而不是帮他。
All right, let's wrap up the whole article with part 3 of today's lesson. In short, seaweed appears to offer numerous benefits through various applications. So, in short, or in summary, seaweed seems to be a great way to give lots of positive benefits through different uses. So, for example, we know that we can eat seaweed, and seaweed is easy to grow, and it can be better for the environment. But we know that seaweed can be used in other situations, like for biofuel. If you use it in biofuel, it has the ability to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So seaweed seems like a pretty positive thing.
It does, however, but experts are concerned about the effects that seaweed farming on a larger scale might have. Okay, so if we do agree to grow more seaweed, we need to find places to do that, and that might have an effect on the environment. So experts are concerned, or they are worried about the effects of seaweed farming. It might have a big effect on the environment, and while our oceans are vast, large seaweed farms could change ecosystems forever and might even destroy some forms of marine life. So in order to grow more seafood, we need to have these large seaweed farms, I should say. And yes, indeed, they may change ecosystems forever because they're going to be big and they're going to have a big effect on the environment. Nobody really knows what's going to happen.
Right. While certain marine life, they might consume seaweed as part of their diet, when you suddenly have too much of something, especially when it comes to marine ecosystem, when you suddenly have too much algae, it could potentially do harm to marine animals because they might have less oxygen in the water and it might cause them to die.
Right, so yes, we know that the oceans are large, they are vast. Still, if we had seaweed farms in various places, it could have an effect on the environment. And to prevent seaweed farming from doing more harm than good, regulations should be created to ensure that we do not abuse this treasure from the seas. So we want to stop seaweed farming from doing more harm than good. This is an interesting phrase here, to do more harm than good. That means you intend to do something good, but for whatever reason, you actually ended up harming something. You actually made the situation worse.
Right. And because we want to grow seaweed in a larger scale, regulations should be created to ensure that we do not abuse this treasure from the seas. So we're worried that if we grow seaweed in a larger scale, it might do harm. So we should put laws or regulation or rules that are made or used to maintain the safety of the growing of the seaweed. And we want to try not to abuse this treasure. We don't want to mistreat or misuse this seaweed that is given to us from the beautiful seas.
Right. To abuse just means to use something in a bad way. For example, I could say, the politician abused his power by taking bribes. That bad boy. Okay, so yes, indeed, we do need to look at this situation carefully, whether or not growing seaweed is going to be beneficial or harmful to the world. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's listen to Hanny now.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分最后一句写到 Given the massive scale of the global beef industry, using seaweed to feed cows could definitely help protect the environment. 鉴于全球牛肉产业规模庞大，使用海藻喂养牛肯定有助于保护环境。那我们首先要介绍的是 given， 在这边当介系词，它表示考虑到某状况的前提下。那常用的句型会是 given 加名词，或是用 given that 主词加动词，然后逗号主词加动词，去表达说由于怎么样，鉴于什么，考虑到什么什么。那我们这边造两个例句。Given her young age, she's pretty mature. 考虑到她年纪轻轻，她的心智相当成熟诶。或是 Given that we don't have much time, we need to speed things up a bit. 考虑到我们没有多少时间，得让事情进行得快一点。好，那另外文中它用到 protect the environment 来表达保护环境。我们补充一下 protect加受词加 from 加上名词或动名词，则可以表达保护什么什么免于怎么样，或是保护什么什么不受到什么的伤害。举例来说 She wore sunglasses to protect her eyes from the sun. 她戴墨镜来保护眼睛不受阳光伤害。好，那么看到课文第三部分则写到 To prevent seaweed farming from doing more harm than good， 则是表达为了防止海藻养殖弊大于利。这边则是用到 prevent 受词 from 加上动词 ing 去表达防止某事物怎么样，阻止某人怎么样。动词 prevent 在这边是表达防止制止，也可以换成 keep， 意思差不多。不过呢 prevent 常常用在尚未发生的事，它就带有预先防止的意味。举例来说 Paul kept his dog on a leash to prevent it from attacking people. Paul 用牵绳牵住他的狗，以防止它攻击人。那么再来看到 keep 加受词 from 动词 ing 则是常常用在正在发生的事。例如 The rain kept them from going fishing. 下雨使他们无法去钓鱼。好，那我们最后还要补充一下哦， keep 的用法其实它还可以用到 keep 加受词 from 加名词去表达，像 keep people from danger 就是防止人们遭遇危险。可是如果用 keep something from somebody 则是表达保密隐瞒，不让某人知道某事。举例来说 She kept the secret from her sister. 她不让她姐姐知道那个秘密。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Dietary. Tina took her guests' dietary preferences into account in creating the menu for the dinner party. Application. The application of Dr. Moore's theory has led to the development of several new medicines. Emission. Government officials want to reduce carbon emissions over the next 5-year period. Capacity. As an actor, Dale has found his capacity to quickly learn lines extremely useful. Massive. The earthquake caused a massive landslide that buried half the town. Regulation. Due to the new regulation, every employee will need to receive safety training every year. Abuse. Christy promised not to abuse the power of her new role by favoring certain employees.
Discussion starter starts now.
Here's our discussion starter. The question is, do you agree that seaweed could be used to replace a significant amount of protein sources? Why or why not?
No, I don't think that seaweed could be used to replace a significant amount of protein sources, given that not all people are able to accept the flavor that seaweed gives off. Seaweed basically just tastes like the ocean, and not everybody likes the taste of fish or ocean. Unfortunately, with seaweed, you can't really extract that taste or that odor from the seaweed. So I don't think it's easy to convince people that don't like to eat seafood to eat seaweed.
Well, I must heartily disagree. I think that seaweed could be used to replace a significant amount of protein sources because we've got lots of talented chefs out there in the world, and I'm sure they could come up with lots of new, exciting ways to cook seaweed that even people who hate seaweed would wonder why they ever hated it in the first place.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Kiki.
I am Roger.
See you next time.